and the crowd held its breath. Antoine Lavoisier stood calm, eyes fixed forward as the blade of the guillotine loomed above. No last words, no chance to finish his work. Just a sharp, final drop, and with it, the death of reason. Prominent tales told throughout history often focus on warriors, tyrants, or kings. But today, we turn our gaze to a different kind of figure. One who wielded not a sword, but a pen, a scale, and a flame. Lavoisier was no ordinary man. He was a scientist, a reformer, a man of logic and measurement. His experiments revealed that matter could neither be created nor destroyed, a discovery that rewrote the rules of science. He named the elements. He helped create the metric system. He gave chemistry its modern language. But brilliance, it turns out, is not always enough to save a man from the blade. His downfall didn't come from science. It came from politics. Lavoisier was a tax collector in the ferme générale, a role that funded his research but also tied him to the hated aristocracy. Though he supported hospitals, education, and reform, he was branded a villain, a symbol of corruption in a time of blood and fire. In the chaos of revolution, there was no room for nuance. The tribunal needed no evidence of treason, only association, guilt by title, guilt by proximity. And so, Lavoisier was condemned alongside 27 others. He asked for time to complete his experiments. The judge replied coldly, "The Republic has no need of scientists." The blade fell, and with it, the Enlightenment lost one of its brightest flames. Antoine Lavoisier wasn't born a monster, a rebel, or a ruler. He was born into privilege, the kind of quiet power that allows a man to read, think, and question the very fabric of reality. Born in 1743 Paris, Lavoisier grew up in a world teetering between tradition and transformation. It was the age of enlightenment, a time when reason dared to challenge religion, when science stood up to superstition, and when one man could change the course of history with nothing but a question. Educated in law but drawn to science, Lavoisier entered a world still shackled by alchemy and mysticism. At a time when people believed fire contained invisible elements and metals transformed magically, he sought proof. His laboratory became his cathedral, his instruments sacred, and his mission to replace speculation with certainty. By his late 20s, Lavoisier was already challenging centuries-old ideas. He disproved the phlogiston theory, the dominant and false belief about combustion. Instead, he showed that oxygen, a previously misunderstood gas, was the key to burning and respiration. This wasn't just chemistry, it was a revolution of thought. But science didn't exist in a vacuum. Lavoisier's rise was tied to the very empire that would one day condemn him. As a member of the ferme générale, he helped collect taxes for the crown, a position that funded his research but also made him a target. He rubbed shoulders with nobles, scientists, and reformers alike. His work on the metric system helped standardize weights and measures across France, forever shaping modern science and governance. He married Marie-Anne Pierrette-Pauls, a woman as intellectually curious as he was. Together, they formed one of history's most formidable scientific duos. She translated English scientific papers, illustrated his experiments, and edited his publications. Their home became a salon of discovery, a beacon in the storm of a changing France. But even as he brought light to chemistry, dark clouds were forming. The same empire that enabled his rise would soon turn on him, and reason, no matter how powerful, would face a test no formula could solve. History does not unfold in silence. It roars, it shatters, it burns. By the late 1780s, France was cracking. The monarchy stood bloated with power while the common people starved. Bread prices soared, taxes crushed the poor, and the nobility, untouched, lived in gilded ignorance. Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau and Voltaire had planted the seeds of change, but no one, not even the most brilliant minds, foresaw the fury that was coming. It began with murmurs, whispers of liberty, demands for equality, but it didn't take long for whispers to become mobs. The French Revolution erupted in 1789, and with it, the old order began to collapse. The Bastille fell, heads rolled, and power was ripped from the hands of kings and given to the people, or so they believed. For Antoine Lavoisier, the revolution was a paradox. A man of progress, he welcomed reform. He believed in science, in logic, in reason. He had spent his life challenging blind tradition. But Lavoisier wasn't just a scientist. He was part of the Ferme Générale, one of the most despised tax institutions in France. And in this new world, association was guilt. As revolution swept through Paris, the guillotine became the new symbol of justice. Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety declared that terror was not a vice, it was a virtue. Anyone suspected of loyalty to the old regime, of privilege, of power, was marked. Lavoisier tried to continue his work. He published, he taught, he reformed. But the revolution had no time for reason. It fed on rage. And while mobs demanded bread and blood, they saw no difference between a royalist, a corrupt official, or a chemist with noble ties. They didn't see the man who had given France its modern science. They saw only a traitor in a powdered wig. The winds of political change were no longer winds. They were a storm, and Lavoisier was standing directly in its path. Enlightenment was supposed to illuminate, but in revolutionary France, it only cast longer, darker shadows. By 1793, the guillotine didn't discriminate. It sliced through kings, queens, poets, and priests, and soon it came for scientists. The reign of terror was in full swing, and Antoine Lavoisier, once hailed as the father of modern chemistry, found himself accused not of alchemy, but of treason. Lavoisier had spent his life in labs, not war rooms. He measured gases, not loyalties. But none of that mattered. He was tied to the Ferme Générale, the tax-collecting body now seen as a parasite on the starving people. And even though he used his fortune to fund hospitals, publish scientific journals, and support reform, his name was now spoken with venom. In 1794, Lavoisier was arrested along with 27 others. The charge? Being part of a corrupt financial conspiracy against the people of France. Evidence? Irrelevant. In the new courtroom, ideology was the only proof needed. He requested more time, not to escape, not to plead, but to complete his experiments, to finish the work that had redefined human understanding. The response was cold, final. The Republic has no need of scientists. On May 8, 1794, Lavoisier stood before a tribunal. The same man who had discovered the role of oxygen in combustion, who helped develop the metric system, and who introduced the very concept of chemical elements, was sentenced to death in under a day. No witnesses, no defense. This wasn't just a trial of a man, it was a trial of reason itself. From laboratory to courtroom, from chalkboard to scaffold, science had been dragged from the light of truth into the fire of political vengeance. And while Lavoisier once revealed the law that matter cannot be destroyed, he now stood on the precipice of a world where ideas could be silenced and brilliance could bleed. The guillotine did not pause for genius. It did not care for logic, discovery, or truth. By May 1794, France was bleeding brilliance. The very revolution that promised liberty and reason had turned into a machine of terror, grinding down anything that stood too tall. And now, it was Antoine Lavoisier's turn. He wasn't led to the scaffold in disgrace. He walked with the same composure he brought into his laboratory, the place where he had once isolated oxygen, studied combustion, and laid the very groundwork for modern chemistry. But now, there would be no experiments, no lectures, no journals, only a final calculation, the seconds left before the blade. Lavoisier was one among 28 condemned that day. Most were former members of the Ferme Générale, tax collectors labeled as enemies of the people. They were marched to Place de la Révolution, the public theater of death, where blood mixed with rain and cobblestone. The man who helped define the law of conservation of mass now stood at the mercy of a nation that had conserved nothing, not its monarchy, not its morals, not even its brightest minds. His execution was quick, efficient, brutal. His head, severed clean, fell into a basket beside others. No different, no special treatment. The crowd did not cheer. They had become numb. In that moment, France silenced one of its greatest voices, a voice that had spoken only in numbers, evidence, and truth. A fellow scientist, Joseph Louis Lagrange, would later say, "It took them only an instant to cut off that head, and 100 years may not suffice to produce another like it."
This was not justice. This was not revolution.
This was intellectual suicide. And as the blade rose again, France, in its blind hunger for purity, continued to devour the very brilliance that had once lit its path out of darkness. Some days in history echo louder than others. May 8, 1794, was not just a day of execution. It was a day when reason itself was led to the scaffold. Antoine Lavoisier, the mind that had unshackled chemistry from myth, was marched to the Place de la Révolution. The man who had defined elements, named gases, and proved that matter could not be destroyed was now moments away from being erased by the very state he once served. The irony was cruel, the symbolism unforgettable. The sky was gray, the air thick, the blade was ready. Lavoisier stood among 27 others. No special consideration, no recognition for the countless ways he had advanced civilization. To the revolutionaries, he was not a scientist, not a reformer, not a man, but an aristocrat, a symbol of the old regime. His discoveries, his reforms, his brilliance, none of it mattered now. He had once written that nothing is lost, nothing is created, everything is transformed. And on this day, it was he who would be transformed, from man to martyr, from scientist to warning. There was no final speech, no time for legacy. The trial had lasted less than a day, and the sentence came swifter than reason could argue. The blade fell, and just like that, the Enlightenment lost one of its brightest flames. He had asked for time to finish his work, time to contribute more to the people who now watched him die. But the judge had answered coldly, "The Republic has no need of scientists." It wasn't just a man who died that day. It was truth under tyranny, knowledge under fear, and science under suspicion. May 8th, 1794, the day when France stopped listening to reason. The day the revolution, hungry for justice, consumed the very thing that made it possible in the first place. Antoine Lavoisier's head fell on May 8th, 1794, but his ideas refused to die. While the guillotine silenced his voice, the echoes of his work have resonated through centuries, shaping the very foundation of modern science. Lavoisier wasn't just a victim of political chaos. He was a symbol of progress, a man who dared to bring order to the chaos of nature. His discovery that matter cannot be created or destroyed became the cornerstone of chemistry. The very air we breathe, oxygen, was named and understood because of him. The metric system which organizes our world was partly his vision. Yet his legacy is a reminder that progress often comes at a terrible cost. In a time when reason was devoured by fear and suspicion, France lost one of its brightest minds. His execution was a brutal warning that even genius could fall victim to hysteria and power struggles. But history did not forget. The Enlightenment survived the terror. The laws Lavoisier uncovered became pillars of science. His wife, Marie-Anne, preserved his work and fought tirelessly to restore his name. Over time, the world came to see Lavoisier not as a traitor, but as a martyr for knowledge. Today, Lavoisier's story lives on, not just in textbooks or laboratories, but in the cautionary tale of how societies can turn on their own thinkers when fear blinds judgment. His fate poses a question that remains relevant. What price do we pay when progress is crushed by politics? In art, literature, and even popular culture, Lavoisier's name is whispered with reverence and regret. He reminds us that the pursuit of truth is fragile, and that enlightenment demands courage in the darkest of times. So, as we close this chapter, remember, the legacy of Antoine Lavoisier is a beacon, a light that shines, even when the world seems ready to snuff it out. Antoine Lavoisier's death is remembered as a tragedy of the French Revolution. But was it truly justice served, or something darker? Was this the fall of a man who deserved punishment, or a victim of political jealousy and fear? The truth is tangled in the chaos of the Reign of Terror. Lavoisier was a tax collector, yes, but also a pioneer of science, a man who funded hospitals, schools, and scientific societies. His enemies painted him as a corrupt aristocrat, but many historians argue this was a convenient label. The Ferme General was hated, but was Lavoisier truly guilty of crimes against the people? Or was he a scapegoat, crushed under the weight of revolutionary fervor? Some say jealousy played a role. The world of science was changing, and Lavoisier stood at its peak, a beacon of intellect amid political darkness. His enemies may have feared his influence or resented his position. Others believe the revolution demanded a sacrifice, a brutal statement to the privileged classes that no one was untouchable. And in this frenzy, fact was often lost to fiction. There are rumors and stories that stretch beyond proof, tales of secret conspiracies, of scientists plotting with monarchists, and of Lavoisier's alleged greed. But much of this was likely propaganda, the distorted echoes of a society desperate for a villain. In reality, Lavoisier's death was the folly of a frightened nation, a nation that saw reason as a threat and instead chose to silence it. Was it justice? Or was it fear masquerading as justice? Was it truth? Or simply a convenient story crafted to serve a revolution's needs? These questions linger and remind us that history is rarely black and white, but a complex weave of human motives, mistakes, and myths. Lavoisier's execution remains a warning. When fear rules, even the brightest minds can fall. Antoine Lavoisier's execution did not silence his story. If anything, it amplified it, turning a man into a martyr and a legacy into a monument. In the years following his death, the world struggled to come to terms with the loss. His wife, Marie-Anne Lavoisier, refused to let his name be forgotten. She dedicated herself to preserving his work, publishing his papers, and reminding the world of the man behind the guillotine's blade. Her efforts ensured that Lavoisier's discoveries continued to shape science long after the revolution's fury had died down. Across Europe and beyond, the story of the scientist who died for knowledge began to spread. He became more than a historical figure. He became a symbol of the dangers faced by those who dare to challenge the status quo, a symbol of the price paid by progress in times of fear and chaos. Artists, writers, and thinkers memorialized Lavoisier in paintings, books, and monuments. His image appeared in salons and lecture halls. His name was invoked as a warning, a reminder that the pursuit of truth can be perilous, especially when power trembles before change. But the cultural echoes didn't stop there. Lavoisier's fate inspired debates on the relationship between science and society, on how fragile intellectual freedom can be when politics demands obedience. His life and death have been referenced in novels, plays, and even modern documentaries, ensuring that his story remains alive and relevant. Today, Antoine Lavoisier stands not only as the father of chemistry, but as a cautionary emblem, a man whose brilliance survived an era determined to extinguish it. His legacy is a monument not just to science, but to the enduring human spirit that seeks knowledge even in the darkest times. The story of Antoine Lavoisier ends where many tragedies do, beneath the cold, unyielding blade of the guillotine. But his death was not just the end of a man. It was the moment when knowledge met the blade, and history was forced to reckon with the cost. Lavoisier's execution was swift, merciless, and final. The revolutionary court had no use for science, no patience for nuance. To them, he was a symbol of the old regime's corruption, a tax collector, an aristocrat, and a target ripe for sacrifice. But history would tell a different story. Lavoisier was more than a victim of political purges. He was a visionary who transformed chemistry forever. He showed the world that matter could not be destroyed, only changed. He named oxygen and hydrogen, gave us the metric system, and taught us to question what we thought we knew. His death was a stark reminder that knowledge is fragile, especially when confronted with fear, suspicion, and power struggles. The blade that severed his head symbolized more than just a man's fate. It represented the dangers that arise when society turns against its thinkers. Yet, the final verdict of history is not one of condemnation, but of respect. Lavoisier's legacy outlived the terror that ended his life. His discoveries form the bedrock of modern science. His story warns us how easily reason can be silenced, but also how it inevitably finds a way to endure. When knowledge meets the blade, it may fall, but it never truly dies. And in the echo of that fall, future generations learn. Sometimes the greatest sacrifice is the spark that lights the way forward. So, as we close this chapter, remember Antoine Lavoisier, a man who gave us the tools to understand the world and paid the ultimate price for his brilliance.